to introduce you to two of my favorite people. This one I'm smarter than and better looking than. Just you know that, you know that. My brother Kevin and my beloved sister-in-law Marcia. And I'll tell you a little bit about them first. Kevin is the pastor at Magnolia Lutheran in Magnolia, right out of Seattle. And he's been doing that, how many years? Pastoring? Seriously. And how many years have you been doing pastoring? 32 years. And he and Marcia have been married 33 years. They were both youth directors, and they met on a common youth director trip in Mexico. Yeah. So, and they have two wonderful young men. One, Dylan, is getting married next summer to Abby, a wonderful young woman. And he works as he attends to a golf course in Everett. And then their youngest, Tyler, we're really excited about this, he loves baseball. Baseball is his thing. And he just took a job as a clubhouse manager with the Cincinnati Reds. So if they win the World Series, Rick told me this, he gets a ring. And he'll never let us forget it. So just so you know that. And Kevin, besides being a pastor, is a historian. I remember when we were little, I was in kind of junior high. He had a poster of the presidents on his wall as a very young man. And history was your major. History was his major at PLU. And then how many years ago was it that you finished reading the biographies? Okay. He's read a lot of biographies. He'll tell you about it later. I have to tell you the honest truth. He starts talking history, and some of us in the family go glassy-eyed and say, I got to go get a drink of water. But he's fascinating, and I think you'll very much, I know you'll very much enjoy him. He's actually, you can plug your ears, kind of wonderful. And Marcia, she and Kevin, they live in Everett. Their first congregation here was right outside of Everett. Marcia is a mental health counselor, and she works for a Lutheran Counseling Network. So, and she's very gifted at what she does. And you work with married couples. Yes, her specialty is working with married couples and bringing better communication. And she's also worked with young little ones, with helping them see the Bible stories in new ways. So I'm very, very proud of them. Can you tell that? Yeah. And so they will be offering the presentation today on resilience from a historical and mental health perspective. And let's welcome them with a hand of applause.
Well, welcome, and thank you for the warm hand. There's a handout so you can see how close we are to the end. You'll see that there's an outline in our time together, and this is basically Resilience 101. We're following this book, Happier No Matter What, Cultivating Hope, Resilience, and Purpose in Hard Times. So it's by Tal Ben-Shahar. And we're looking at more at the subtitle than we are the title. We're not going to be focusing on happier no matter what. We will explain that briefly. But the subtitle, Cultivating Hope, Resilience, and Purpose in Hard Times. I can pass that around so you can kind of see what it is that we're going to be using for our resource today. The handout, you'll see that we will, first, the etymology, the word that's hidden in the word resilience is a Latin word, and I went to Puyallup High School. I'm not going to pretend to say Latin words correctly, but I can tell you that what it means is to bounce, to return. Well, to bounce or to to leap or to bounce. And so the prefix re before it is to bounce again, to bounce back. And so that's what resilience is it's that capacity to bounce back. That's what the focus is that we're going to have today. With resilience and happiness, it is an unfortunate title that he uses the word happiness in the title. We're not focusing so much on that, but so much more as well-being. The author is a psychologist and has been a psychologist with the Harvard Business School, and he is a positive psychologist. And what a positive psychologist does is focus on what is right with the person rather than what is wrong. Because there's a big, thick book called the DSM that identifies things the illnesses. And so instead of focusing on that, the positive psychology focuses on what is right or what is the strength of the individual. So again, we're focusing more on the subtitle. The book uses a lot of research, and there's a phrase in this that I just want to introduce called anti-fragility, and I found that to be absolutely fascinating. In psychology, there is research on anti-fragility, which is a step beyond resilience. I'd never heard that before, but to kind of move toward anti-fragility. It's growing stronger as the result of adversity. It's just the opposite of post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. It's called PTG, post-traumatic growth. And it's actually more common than PTSD in terms of its frequency. But that's another topic for another day. I found it to be fascinating, and it touches on it in this book, but if you're fascinated by it, you can get the book, and then in the back of the book there's footnotes where you can get more information about anti-fragility. The main content that we're spending on is going to be on 5 letters, an acronym, on SPIRE, S-P-I-R-E. The first letter is the spiritual well-being, the second is physical well-being, the third is intellectual well-being, the fourth is relational well-being, and the last is emotional well-being. After each one of those categories, there will be some interaction that you will have with some questions for you to evaluate your well-being. And then eventually we'll map those, and we'll even get a chance to work together in dyads, groups of 2, maybe, depending on how it works, maybe groups of 3. So this is more interaction. The goal is to have you have something that you can walk out the door with that is a practical way to move forward with incremental growth for resilience. At the very end, we'll do some question and answers and observations, and then a conclusion. So that's what we're going to be doing at this point. So for what we're going to do now is focus more on the first letter of that acronym, the spiritual well-being, and so I'm going to hand it over to Marcia.
Thank you. So we all are people of faith, and we talk about spiritual well-being in terms of our faith. We think of our prayer life, we think of ways that we are nurtured in worship, with the sacraments, with scripture. This is all part of our spiritual well-being. And there's more than that, and I want to touch on a couple of additional pieces with that today. One is purpose and meaning in our life. Our identity as Christians gives us a purpose and a meaning in life. We can look at our daily work in terms of our gifts that God has given us, in terms of how we can serve our neighbor through our gifts, and in that way, it's sort of like our life has meaning. We can think, though, there's a story that relates to this of a traveler in Italy who sees workers at a construction site. And he approaches the first man and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm laying bricks." He approaches another man doing the same type of work, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a wall." And he approaches a third man and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm building a cathedral to the glory of God." All doing the same work, but it's sort of like the mindset that they bring to it is a little different. There's a couple studies, Kevin mentioned that there's research in this book. There's a couple studies that explore this a bit, where they studied workers in a hospital. They talked to janitors, they talked to administrators, they talked to doctors, and they found the same thing to be true, that in each of those groups, no matter what job you were doing, there's some people that looked on it as a job or a paycheck. Some looked on it as a career, a way to climb the ladder of success and make more money. And the third group who looked at it as a calling, something that they were doing, to bring their gifts to the world and to achieve a greater purpose. And so it's like no matter what we're doing, laying bricks, being a janitor, being a doctor, it has more to do with the spirit or the way we approach it rather than what the work is. We can think, if we're doing a super important job like a doctor, that must make us really happy and we must be really content and feel like we're really accomplishing something for the greater good. But it's not so much about what we're doing, it's about how we think about what we're doing. So, ways to think about your own daily work, whether you're retired and, caring for grandchildren, whether you're employed out there in the world, whether you're a student, whatever your daily tasks might be, a couple of questions to be thinking about that can help you be thinking about it as a calling rather than just a job or a career is, this is important because, and sort of answering that question for yourself. I'm passionate about this because, or I help others through what I'm doing here because, and those are just some questions to lead in a way to that sense of meaning and purpose. So that's a beautiful aspect of spiritual well-being, seeing purpose in your daily life. There's another one that I wanted to talk about, which is mindfulness. That's sort of a word that comes out of the work that I do. It has to do with being present in the moment on purpose and without judgment. If we get caught up in the future and like what's going to happen and all the what ifs about the future, it can lead us to anxiety. It's sort of like we're never quite here and now. We're always thinking about what's next and what about this, what about this, what about this, and it can lead to anxiety. If we are thinking mostly about the past, if only I would have done this differently, if only I would have done that, if I would have said this, if I would have said that, it can lead to depression, where we sort of get down on ourselves, we feel like we have no hope, and it's like we're sort of stuck in the past. But if we can find our way into the present moment, it's sort of like we know we're okay, we know we have a chance, to try something new, we know that, we're safe, we know that, things are okay. And so it's become kind of an important part of well-being and sort of that spiritual well-being to find a way to be present in the moment. And a practice related to this is something called meditation. And I work with many clients who are Christian, some who are not, and whether you're Christian or whether you aren't, there's a way to, on purpose, come into the present where you know you're going to be okay. And I would like to actually guide you through this, a little meditation together here today, as a way to sort of experience what this is like. And I was going to have us open the windows, but I think I'm going to do, in a way, exactly what I do with my clients. Because I think in this group, I'd love to bring God into it. Okay? So what I'm going to invite you to do in just a moment is to close your eyes, and I'll just guide you with my voice. We're going to be paying attention to various parts of the body and sort of letting go whatever's happening, giving it to God. An important part of this, besides being in the moment, it's not about, okay, I've got to do this just right, and if I don't do it right, then I'm not meditating correctly. In fact, that's kind of the opposite of how we want to think. It's sort of like our mind is going to wander, right? You'd be listening to me, but your mind is bound to wander, and that's okay. And when you notice that it's wandering, just bring it back. And that part of noticing that you lost your focus and bringing your focus back, that's as important as keeping your focus, if that makes sense. Okay, I've wandered away. I'm not going to be hard on myself. I'm just going to redirect my focus back. So let's do this together, and then we'll talk about it briefly. So I'm going to close my eyes. You can close your eyes if you want to, and I'm just going to guide us through. It'll take about 5 minutes. So let's start by just becoming aware that we're sitting right here in this room. And that right here in this room, God is with us. And you might notice when you say to yourself, God is with me, you might notice if a feeling comes up. Maybe something happens in your body. Maybe it's somewhere between your chest and your belly, just a physical sensation that comes to mind when you think to yourself, God is here. And continuing to focus inward, let's start to pay attention to our breathing. I'm going to invite you to just focus your attention wherever you notice your breath flowing. Maybe that might be in your belly, maybe in your chest, maybe in your nostrils. And wherever you feel your breath most vividly, just focus your attention there. See if you can notice a gentle expansion in your chest, or a movement in your belly, or air flowing through your nostrils. And just see if you can keep your focus there. And again, if your mind wanders, that's okay. When you notice it's wandered, just bring it back. Now we're going to shift and focus on our feet. Notice what's happening there. Maybe you feel sensations of warmth or coolness. Maybe you feel sensations from your socks or your shoes. Maybe there's tingling. Maybe you've got an achy bunion. Whatever's happening there in your feet, just noticing it, and then turning all that over to God's care. Let's shift now and put our focus on our calves. Again, noticing sensations of temperature, sensations from your clothing, maybe again tingling. Maybe you don't notice much happening at all, and if that's the case, just notice, here's where my attention is focused right now. And whatever you notice, don't judge it, but just turn it over to God. Now let's shift up into our thighs. Maybe you'll notice the pew underneath you. Maybe you'll notice your hands resting there. Again, maybe sensations of temperature or clothing. You might even notice your pulse. And whatever you notice, just acknowledging it with acceptance and turning it over to God's care. Next, your lower body, your belly, your lower back. Noticing any physical sensations here. And you might even notice an emotional sensation like a feeling of heaviness or butterflies. Whatever you're noticing in your lower body, just acknowledge that without judging it, and then turn that over to God. Next, your upper body, your upper back, your shoulders, your chest. Noticing any physical sensations like achiness. And again, maybe there may be emotional sensations like a lightness, a sense of anticipation. And again, whatever you notice, acknowledge it with acceptance and then turn that over to God. Next, let's notice what's happening in our hands, in our forearms, in our upper arms, acknowledging all that and turning that over to God. And then let's move into our face, noticing the placement of our tongue, our jaw, our lips, our nose and our nostrils, our eyes and the muscles around our eyes. Noticing everything happening here and then turning that over to God. And then shifting to our head, the back part and the top part. Maybe there's achiness here. Maybe you're noticing busy thoughts, which is very common. That's, after all, the job of our brain is to think. But during this short practice, let's see if we can just notice our thoughts rather than latching onto them, sort of watching them float by like clouds across the sky or leaves down a stream, getting just a half a step of distance to say, how interesting what I'm thinking right now. Now we'll make one last stop on this little tour of the body. Let's go back to our breath. And again, focus on where you notice it the most vividly and just observe it as it flows in and out in its own natural rhythm. We'll do this together silently for just another moment. And again, when you notice your mind wander, just bring it back. So now just checking in one last time, particularly with that feeling zone between your chest and your belly. Notice how you're feeling now. And then as you're ready, please rejoin me in the room. So anyone willing to say, what was that like for you? We may have lost a few people, yeah?
When you were talking about God was with us and in between our belly, like I felt a lot of gratitude and actually said the words, I'm so grateful that you're here with me. And then at the end I felt expanded.
Beautiful, thank you. Any other observations, what you noticed?
It
Yeah.
kind of felt like the prayer vigil. We're here for an hour or however long praying. Yeah. Especially you sign up for an hour, you get a chance to sit back and just kind of relax a little bit and let God kind of work in through you. And so it's kind of like, I remember this.
Nice, nice, beautiful, beautiful reflections. Yeah, the idea is when we come to the present moment on purpose in that way, yeah, there's a great sense of, in this case, gratitude, well-being, kind of this, like, yeah, an antidote to either anxiety or depression, for sure. Well, thank you for entering into that with me. I think we should just...
This is where we ask people the questions.
So now we're going to invite you to reflect a little bit. So in this whole area of spiritual well-being, we have a couple of questions for you that are in your handout. Let's turn together there now. Is it page 2? Yeah, page 2, cultivating hope, resilience, and purpose on the spiritual section, the very top one. So we're going to ask you for each of these questions to kind of give yourself a rating, and you don't have to show this to anybody. It's sort of a self-assessment. Where am I with my spiritual well-being? And if you don't have a pen, we can probably pass them out for you. I was going to show you how. No, that's later. Sorry. Okay, for now you're just going to answer these questions. So for the first one, do you experience a sense of meaning and purpose in your work? And we don't necessarily mean paid work. We're talking about your daily life. And what we're working with a scale from 0 to 8. And 0 to 3 would be rarely, 4 to 5 would be sometimes, 6 to 7 would be often, and 8 would be always. So give yourself a number, 0 to 8, and then go on to the next question. Do you experience a sense of meaning and purpose at home? Are you generally present in the moment in your work, interactions, and tasks? And are you mindful of the greater purpose of your daily activities? Give yourself just a little, it's not a grade, but just a little, take your temperature, let's say. Later, we're going to do something like that, but for now, just give yourself those. What was that? Okay, well, try and give yourself a little, maybe an average for each of those, yeah. Yeah, and if the answers vary, that is okay. Okay, I'm going to go on. You can finish up your answers there. Kevin and I are going to share these presentations, but just so happens that I'm doing 2 in a row, so you'll have to bear with me. So the next one is physical well-being, and it has to do with how our minds and our bodies are so connected. There's a quote from an Eastern leader who says, "Sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but other times your smile can be the source of your joy." It's this idea that our body, in a way, can lead our mind in maybe in a different direction. And the author of the book talks about a study that was done where people were invited to walk in a sad walk, and I'll sort of demonstrate it for you. And then they were invited to walk this way. And I wonder if you can guess which group felt happier. Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Yeah. So it's just an example of how our minds and our bodies are so connected. So when we are talking about well-being overall, it's important that we tend to our physical well-being, and I'll be talking about some aspects of that. We can sometimes get this idea that stress is bad, but that's not always the case. A little bit of stress is good. A little bit of stress gets us out of bed in the morning. I got company coming, I better get up, you know. Or like my sons both like to lift weights, and it's like this idea of when you lift weight, you actually are kind of breaking down your muscles, but it's like if you do it repetitively and then you rest and then you build a little bit more weight, then you build your strength, and that's good stress. The opposite of that would be like lifting no weights and then going in and trying to lift 50 pounds and, you know, and then you break, you know, you tear something and then, you know, you're sort of have to go to physical therapy or something like that. So it's the idea of giving, you know, being gradual, giving yourself little breaks. And again, another study they talked about was one of our author's colleagues was teaching a group at the New York Stock Exchange about how to manage stress. And he said at the end of the presentation, he said, "Now I want you to all, in your days, in order to manage your stress, I want you to take a 15-minute break every 3 hours or something like that." And they just laughed. They said, "Well, that's never going to happen. That's ridiculous." He said, "Well, what about a 5-minute break every hour?" They said, "No, that's never going to work. Like, we're like right there. We got to be right there." He said, "What about what did he say, a 1 minute break every 2 hours. They said, okay, we could do that. So every 2 hours, and he said, I want you to do this. You got to do it. He said, I want you to take 5 deep breaths for 1 minute every 2 hours. And they did it. And they reported back that they felt less stressed at the end of the day, they felt more energy, and they were able to keep up this crazy schedule they had because they took these little mini breaks. And so he talks about just the importance of mini breaks. And then he also talks about it's also important to take middle-sized breaks, and that would be like having a weekend, or taking a day off to not do tasks and just read, or, say reading, taking a few hours off every evening just to listen to music or something like that, middle-sized breaks. And then he talks about macro breaks, big breaks. So that's like going camping, getting out of town, taking a week away to, see your grandkids, whatever it might be. That all those types of breaks are important for us in just caring for our physical well-being. He also talks in this crazy era that we live in where we're all trying to get so many things done. He talks about single tasking instead of multitasking. That we do when we do one thing at a time, it's a lot less stressful for us, we do a lot better job, and we just wind up feeling better about whatever it is that we're doing. Exercise, of course, is another one. He talks about how 30 minutes of exercise 3 times a week is a great place to start, and how 45 minutes 5 times a week is even better. He says that exercise can have all the best effects of the most, remember he's a psychologist, the most powerful psychotropic medication, right? It's the best for managing anxiety, the best for managing depression. Not like exercise is like taking medication, but more like not exercising is like taking a medication to make yourself depressed, right? He's talking about we are meant to be moving and that we need to be doing that. And then the last part I'm going to talk about is sleep. He quotes a lot of statistics that I'm going to have to read to you about sleep. He says if we don't get enough sleep, we have higher stress, we have more depression, more anxiety, our immune system is weakened, we have a greater likelihood of obesity because our bodies wake up craving high fat and high glucose food. It speeds up aging, it kills libido, it creates more, and it even deals with cognitive functioning. So like our kids did when we were raising our little ones or our grandkids, we benefit from a sleep routine. It's like with the little ones, it's like, okay, now we have a story, and now we brush our teeth, and now we lay down and we have our prayers, and it's sort of like, giving your body cues. Okay, now it's time to wind down. Now it's time to relax. Now it's time to let go. We as adults benefit from that too. And I'm guilty of this myself. We get on those screens, right? And they're very stimulating. So even if we want to lay down and go to sleep, sometimes all that stuff on the screen, it keeps us thinking, especially if we're looking at political stuff. It's like, we start churning. So it can help maybe an hour before you want to get to sleep to turn off the screens and pick maybe 4 things that you find relaxing. Maybe some light reading, not those murder mysteries, right? Some light reading, maybe reading from the Psalms, or, lighting a candle. Some people like to take a bath, listening to some gentle music, just as a way to kind of help your body wind down so that when you lay down in bed, you're already maybe halfway there, and just to support your sleep. So, okay, yeah, Kevin's reminding me. I wanted to teach you another practice related not to sleeping, but to this idea of how the body and the mind are so connected. So we did the meditation practice, which can be a help to sort of centering and coming to a calmer state. There's also another approach where we utilize our breath. And our breath, when you think about it, it's our God-given it's a God-given function that we can control. And so the breath is our body's natural calming system. And the most calming part of the breath is our exhale. That's the part that really slows us down. And so there's a technique called 4-7-8 breathing that builds on this idea, where you breathe in rapidly to the count of 4, you hold your breath for the count of 7, and you breathe out more slowly to the count of 8. And you do a set of 4 like this, and it's the doctor who sort of brought this to the Western world says it's the best way to manage anxiety, and also just to get a sense of well-being any time of day. So, Kevin, I'm gonna have you hold the microphone so that I can demonstrate it, and then I want you to join with me. I can't count and breathe at the same time, so I have to show you on my fingers what I'm doing. So I'm gonna get rid of my breath, and then I'm gonna do 4, 7, 8, so. Will you do it with me? We'll do a set of 4 like that. Ready? So in for the count of 4, hold for the count of 7, and exhale for the count of 8. You ready? Ooh. Let's do it again. One more. I can't apparently count with my fingers and breathe at the same time either. But you get the idea. And this is something that you can do any time of day. You could excuse yourself and go to the restroom and do it. You can do it right, at the table where you're sitting. And it's when you do a set of 4 with a little practice, it'll give you a nice sense of well-being. So, okay, we're going to share a little story, I guess, with most of these too. So we were thinking about a story of someone we know where their physical well-being has been a part of what has given them their overall well-being. And this woman just turned 99 years old. I don't know if you have someone like this in your congregation, but she started coming to Magnolia when she was already in her 90s. She's been coming every week, and it's only been in the last year or so that she's begun to use a walker, and she has someone else bring her. And it's only been in the last month that she hasn't been able to come to worship. And it's the reason I think about this is it's sort of like she has kept her body going in a way in order to be with us. And it's sort of like, I just think, I'm always so grateful when these older folks take that kind of physical effort, right, to be with us. And it's almost like they're giving of themselves in that way, just moving their bodies and getting themselves to worship. So, I just think about her as a person with a lot of well-being and how much her body has been part of that. So thank you, Kevin. So let's go back to our handout. We've got a little set of questions on physical well-being. So again, you're going to give yourself just a little, take your temperature from 0 to 8, and give yourself a number for each of these questions. If they vary, give yourself a range or an average. Are you physically active? And remember, we go 0 to 3 is rarely, 4 to 5 is sometimes, 6 to 7 often, and 8 is always. And remember, walking and coming to church, that's some physical activity right there. So give yourself a gracious number. Do you take care of your body? We're talking about sleep, rest, eating well, single tasking versus multitasking. And then, do you take time for rest, recovery, and sleep? And do you have ways to manage stress?
We'll give you another minute to do this section. And as you may have already guessed, we are going to add up those scores, if you haven't already done that. So just and feel free to stand up as we have this little interaction today, stretch if you wish. use the restroom. We're not going to have a break, so we're just going to keep on moving. So if you need to stand up and walk around, you can do that, just like they did with the people from the New York Stock Exchange, that 1 minute or 30-second break. Feel free to do that. One thing that I didn't say at the very beginning was the reason we're doing this is because we're trying to develop practices or disciplines. And these practices and disciplines are going to help with resilience, help foster some. Resilience is not about preventing the hard stuff from happening and come to us, but it's cultivating our capacity to rebound. And by developing some of these practices, it cultivates that capacity. It bolsters our psychological immune system. So now we're going to the third one, which was intellectual well-being. Well, the microphone's been passed to me, and not that many years ago, I would have run away from this letter and this part of this presentation because I thought, because I had a comparative. Every one of us brings an intellectual quotient that's not compared to anything. Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. So yes, I bring an intellect to this conversation, and so do you. Bless you. When I was young, the intellect kind of paralyzed me. I had an older sister who got good grades, and nobody was ever really concerned about my grades. And I had decent grades. I never had stellar grades. And the result in that inside of me was, well, they're not concerned that my grades are not as stellar, so I'm not as stellar as them. Does this make sense? It developed itself into a primal wound that it expressed itself in many different ways. One was a paralysis around mathematics, Kevin. We've talked about this. Kevin taught math at college, and one of the places that he taught was getting over math paralysis. And so what he was teaching was as much psychology as what it was mathematics. And I had a paralysis around a math formula called 5 plus 3. There was flashcards, and my father would do these flashcards, and I had this paralysis. And when it came to 5 plus 3, I couldn't do it. And he'd shuffle the cards and put 5 plus 3 kind of toward the top again, and once again it came up, and I had this hurdle that I couldn't get over. My younger brother, who was 5 years younger than me, my father had good intent. I'm not sure if it was necessarily landed well. He turned to my younger brother and said, "Jay, what is 5 plus 3? And Jay said, 8. He also turned to Jay and said, "What is 2 plus 2? And Jay said, 8. Right? But what landed in me is that my younger brother could do something that I could not with the terms of intellect. So it was this primal wound. That narrative has changed. That we are, our world is evolving. And so are we. Thanks be to God. And God is in that evolution. And so it happens through cultivating curiosity, through diving into deep learning, and being willing to fail. So those three things. Cultivating curiosity, diving into deep learning, and being willing to fail. So cultivating curiosity, it has been said that children arrive in the first days of school as question marks. And by the time they leave graduation, they are periods. What is it to invite them to enter into learning with questions? to embrace the question, even if it doesn't have an answer. There are some mathematical formulas that don't have answers. How beautiful is that? How frustrating is that? But how beautiful is that? Or even some that have more than one answer, I've been told. Well, curiosity is a choice. A conscious, thoughtful choice. And it goes with the gift of being willing to ask questions. And it embraces wonder with a willingness to be fascinated by the world that surrounds us. I didn't bring my computer. It's fascinating to run into something that changes your whole perspective. And it happened just a little bit more than a month ago. The solar system, the planets going around the sun, that for decades. And I recently became aware that it's not static, it's not stationary. The sun is a projectile and moving around the universe. The sun has been over 4 billion years old, and it has made 19 laps around the universe in 4 billion years. How many millions of years does it take to take one lap? The last time we were in this point in the lap was during the Triassic period, when dinosaurs were walking, and where Pangea was on the Earth, where all continents were one spot. How fascinating. And then the planets are not only sort of going around the sun, but they're also twirling, affected by the speed of the sun being projected through the universe. It's just absolutely fascinating. It's not a static circle. We are moving. It changes kind of how you see the world, and to be fascinated by the world that surrounds us. It also, cultivating curiosity, nurtures, I think, the gift of humility. In Eastern mysticism, it says, a foolish student learns only from wise teachers. But a wise student can even learn from the most foolish of teachers. And learning, then, is not an acquisition of information to be used for power or persuasion, but learning for the sake of learning and wonder and discovery is beautiful. Entering into the place of deep learning, where to begin? Draw a circle around your feet. What interests you? What part of the natural world interests you? What part of history or music or athletics or the body or mathematics or shape and design? What interests you? Somewhere around 2006, one or both of my boys asked, Dad, how many books have you read? And I said, I don't know, maybe 1,000. Not as many as you, Katie, but maybe 1,000. And I said, no, really, how many? I said, oh yeah, maybe a little bit less. And I got to thinking, to read 1,000 books, you would need to read, 25 books a year. Reading 25 books a year, for me, is significant. I'll tell you more about how many books I read now, but that's 2 books a month. To read 25 books a year, it would take 40 years to read 1,000 books. I didn't read 1,000 books. And so what I did with my son's question is I opened up a spreadsheet and I started writing down the names of the books that I read. For the most part, I can remember the books. I can remember. Books are a little bit like a friend. I remember friends. I remember books, and oftentimes I remember where it was when I was reading them. And I'm sure so I had this book in the year 2009. I had this book, this nice thick book. I don't even know how I got it, but it's The Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. 900 pages. Um, it's a book about Abraham Lincoln. I read the book and I was absolutely fascinated. She's a fantastic storyteller. And I thought to myself as I read this book, oh my goodness, Doris Kearns Goodwin knows Abraham Lincoln better than I know Kevin Bates. And so it made me wonder, well, who is me and who are these other presidents that came before and after him? About the same time that summer, we went to Yellowstone as a family, and there was a book by Edmund Morris on, it was a 3-volume series. I bought the first one on Teddy Roosevelt. And at the time, I wondered, who are the 44 men? And because there's only been men so far, it's inevitable. Thanks be to God. Who are they? And so it started on this journey of I started around the same time I started reading one book at a time. Like what Marcia said, not multitasking. I used to have 4 or 5 books at a time, and they'd sit on my night board or my end table. And often I wouldn't even finish any of them. But I decided to read one book at a time, even if it was a lousy book. It changed everything. I went to from reading about 10 to 12 books a year to reading about 36 books a year. Just being focused on one book at a time. Well, it took 10 years, but in the year, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, finish.
It took 10 years, but I read at least 2 biographies of every president. A total of 138 biographies. And you break that down, it was about 20 pages a day. There's a historian that says all history is biography. I love that. All biography is story. So to take a deep dive into something, just to figure out what's this world around you. And I didn't know that you knew that I had the poster of the presidents. That's fascinating. Yeah, what was your question?
I just wanted to say, I'm reading about 2 books a month, which is fabulous, and I try to read outside of the modality of my Christian thinking.
Yeah.
So I'll read Deepak Chopra, who's
Absolutely.
in India, and Yogi,
Yeah.
and other writers also.
I'm not your pastor, but I would say yes. Yes.
These different authors. And then the most recent miracle that's happened to me is the church asked me to participate on the music team. And when we talk about deep learning of music,
Yeah.
and I'm practicing chimes, and then we talk about failing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm failing consistently.
Yeah.
And I found out how forgiving the congregation
Beautiful, 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 absolutely. So Ben Franklin was never a president, but Ben Franklin, he did sign the part of the Declaration of Independence. Early, he was older in life when that whole signing of the Declaration happened. He had this great quote. He said, after signing, he said, "Now we need to hang together, or else we will all hang together." But earlier in life, in the mid-1750s, he started, when he was in Philadelphia, he started inviting a couple of friends over to his house a couple of times a month for conversation. And they started taking turns where each friend would take a turn presenting on an idea. Might have been something they read in a magazine, might have been on topic of the latest technology. Now remember, the latest technology at the time was something to do with printing. Somebody else might present on seeds of self-rule in the idea of an American democracy. This is some of the origins of our country, our nation together. More people heard about it and started coming into this house. And they named it the Junta, Junto. The Junta. Well, about 8 years ago, after I left my previous congregation 13 years ago, about And David wanted to meet with us. And so now for the last 3 months, we've been meeting at Hector's house in Mukilteo for a junto. And each one of us takes a topic to present. It has nothing to do with the church. Some of the topics on archaeology, Aztec healing practices, adoption practices in the United States, and some family histories. So a question that I'm going to ask you, why don't you turn to even somebody near you, what practice might you embrace for intellectual growth? What practice might you embrace for intellectual growth? Go ahead. We're going to have more time to talk, but before we go on, talking about embracing failure, the scientific method is one that is systematic observation, followed by measurement, followed by experimentation, followed by formulation, followed by testing, and followed by then modifying the hypothesis and repeating it over and over. Modifying the hypothesis because what happened invariably, the test was not successful. You had to do it over. So science depends upon failure in order to move forward. What's implied is the importance of failing and the need for us to learn how to fail with grace. For failing to learn, or learning to fail, is so important that if we don't do it, we fail to learn. The antidote for fear is the willingness to make a mistake. It develops a growth mindset, and it frees us up from arrogance. So self-inventory questions on your handout. Are you learning new things? Scale 1 to 0 to 8? 0 to 8. Do you ask enough questions? 0 to 8. Do you engage in deep learning? Are you failing enough? Go ahead and write those.
I
And
think
this,
I might have edited those slightly, so yours might look slightly different on the paper, but
yeah,
same topics.
okay. Take another minute. Then we're going to move to relational well-being. And those scores are going to be added up and going to be used on a map here. So for relationship well-being, first of all, when I was in college, you probably have learned this from my sister, but in my family of origin, we moved around a lot when growing up. And as a result, we were in people's lives, and then we went into a U-Haul and we moved somewhere else, and we left people's lives. So then when I was in college, I had some friends, and one of my friends, Tom, said, one day we're going to have our families together and going to go on vacation together in Chelan. And I said, Tom, that doesn't happen. It only happens in the movies. People don't hang out with one another for 20, 30, 40 years. It just doesn't happen. Well, Tom was right, and I was wrong. Tom and Jim and Joe have held on to me as friends, and they waited for me to come back and live into these deep relationships. So the question of relational well-being, do you spend quality time with family and friends? Are your relationships deep? Do you take care of yourself? And are you a giver? In terms of deep relationships, there are, from the book it says that studies perpetually show that some of the biggest factors of to being supportive, socially supportive is, of being socially supportive is intimate relationships.
It's one of the biggest factors in resilience.
In resilience. Online relationships are best consumed in moderation. We know that. We can have other relationships in other circles of our church, of our life, even at church, that are polite but kind of bounce off from one another. But this is more going into those deeper relationships where we trust one another through self-disclosure. With self-disclosure, part of wisdom is to know how much to disclose and to whom so that we don't overshare. In terms of cultivating empathy, Elon Musk recently in an interview with Joe Rogan on a podcast said, the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. He said that on March 4th, 2025. Regardless of what you think politically, he said that. I disagree. I wonder what Jesus would say about empathy. Empathy is being able to identify with what other people are feeling. Adam Smith, the economist and philosopher who is formative into our American experiment, said the best route for living empathy is to live face to face with other people. That's when we can laugh with someone and cry with someone. The benefit of empathy is that it ties us together as human beings so we can understand our neighbor's point of view. And see that our well-being is connected to the well-being of our neighbor. In terms of the power of giving, it has been proven through some studies and shown that giving alleviates loneliness and increases empathy. There was a Harvard study with a sum of money was given to a first group of people. They were told to spend it on themselves. Happiness, and then the first day, then they measured people's happiness. It was at a certain level. It said day 2 was down a bit, but it was still at a base level. They did this with a second group of people, but they had to spend money on someone else. The second day when they measured, the drop was not nearly as steep. We know this as Christians, how giving towards others is beneficial for us. The difference between sadness and depression is that sadness includes depression. The difference between sadness and depression is that sadness includes what does the sentence say? There's a word that's missing. Help me out, my love.
Hope. Sadness includes hope.
There it is.
Giving introduces hope.
That's what,
Depression is sadness without hope.
depression is sadness without hope. Anne Frank, I just got done reading Anne Frank's diary. Anne Frank said you can always, she lived upstairs in that house in the annex for over 500 days, silent all the way through the day. You can always, she said, you can always give something, even if it's just kindness. And then we also need to give to ourselves too. Giving to ourselves means taking time to rest, eating healthy, and having some compassion for ourselves. Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. A story before I hand the microphone off to Marcia. There's a man named Ralph at our church. Ralph and his wife Gail were members of another church in Seattle. And through some series of difficulties, they kind of got, it was Gail's generational church. They'd been part of that church for 3, maybe 4 generations. And she kind of felt disconnected from her home congregation and stepped away. And nobody asked about them. Nobody called them. And of all the churches, we were lucky that they dropped in at our place. When I saw them, I said, well, while you're here at our place, until you find the right place, just know that so that you're not untethered, you can be connected with us. In fact, they became associate members at our church, not regular members, associate members. And soon they started singing in the choir. Gail got an illness that she was not always able to go in the choir, but she would sit in the sanctuary. But Ralph would come up and sing in the choir. Ralph was kind of more stoic. He was a Boeing engineer, but he loved the fact that people would ask him questions about his beloved Oregon State Beavers. Gail got increasingly sick. She was no longer able to come to church, but Ralph would come to church. He would sing in the choir. This last Thanksgiving, Gail died. It was midweek. And when the Sunday after she died, Ralph showed up to the choir and sang in the choir because he had relationships. He had a place to belong. And right after Gail's funeral, he said, I'm ready to become a member of Magnolia Lutheran Church. So some questions for emotional well-being, relational well-being. Some questions of relation. Here they are. Do you spend quality time with your family and friends? Do you have deep relationships? Do you take care of yourself? And do you give of yourself? We'll take a minute to give yourself a score of 1 to 8 on that, and then we're going to go to emotional well-being.
So emotional well-being. My training is called emotion-focused therapy. So when I work with individuals and with couples, I'm always paying attention to emotion. And in my way of thinking about it, emotions are natural and normal. And if we allow our emotions, if we can express our emotions, they have kind of an ebb and a flow. It's sort of like we might feel very sad, but if we can express our sadness, it will pass. You know, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, especially if we're in grief, but expressing the emotion is, in a way, it honors it, it gives it its moment, and then it can pass. If we repress our emotions, if we try to avoid them, if we try to push them away, that's when they can create problems. My cousin was in Vietnam. My cousins are all older than me. And he made it all the way through Vietnam and got home and was in a car accident and died. And my aunt was, of course, devastated. But what she did with that deep, deep, despairing sadness is she threw herself into her work. And she sort of pushed down the sadness. And she, in a way, she tried to keep busy. We hear that, keep busy. And years later, she began to have mental health issues. It was sort of like, I don't know that this is true, but it's sort of like by suppressing her grief in that way, it's sort of like it caught up with her. And it was like her emotion is like, began to cause problems for her. So if we can express emotion, it will have its day and then it will move on. So we want, some emotions are more comfortable than others. It's not fun to experience grief and sadness, but it's super important to express it. And so among the ways to express, we'll use the emotion of sadness and grief, is to cry. Having a good cry, there's something to that. And the saying of don't cry, it's not super helpful. In a way, if we're going to accompany someone who's grieving, let's let them know, go ahead and cry. I'm here. It's okay. Cry, If we don't have someone to share with personally, that's the very best. A second best way is to write about our grief. You know, we can write about it in a journal. Better yet, though, to tell a friend, tell a spouse, tell a person. Kevin and I, early in our marriage, learned a little tool for sharing about how we were feeling called a 20-20. It was like we each got 20 minutes to say how we were feeling and just kind of let her go, let her rip. And the job of the other person was to, I think they described it, don't talk. When you're listening, don't talk. And it was a good way for us to say what was on our mind, maybe vent a little bit, and then, be able to be heard and move forward. And yeah, here a little poem about this. Where'd it go? Is it still here? Maybe I put it over here. I think it was here, Kevin. You got it. Do you have it? Okay. Well, there's a nice little poem about emotion called The Guest House, and I don't have it. Do you want to pull it up on your phone? Okay. Use my glasses. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. It's that idea of not pushing it away, but realizing, even when you're a person of faith, it's okay to have a bad thought. It's okay to have a dark emotion. We need to sort of welcome that and understand it, express it, and then hopefully let it go. The flip side of all this is that we aren't our emotions. Our emotions are not us, right? And so it's like when a painful emotion comes, if it doesn't have its day and then move on, we don't want to sort of let it have control over us. It's good to be able, kind of like we did in that meditation, to step back just a little and say, what's going on here? I'm noticing this dark feeling I'm having keeps coming back and it's not moving on. What's happening? It's like we can realize that I might be feeling this way, but this isn't me, and I don't have to let it go like a wild team of horses. By observing it, we can sort of gain a little distance. Maybe at a moment like that where we don't understand what's happening, it could be a good moment to, if a friend can't help, maybe that's a time to check in with a counselor. I'm feeling something, it's not going away. Like, can you help me get to the bottom of this? Yeah. And then the last thing I want to say regarding emotion has to do with gratitude, which we heard about at the very beginning. Khalil Gibran says, we are like vessels with a capacity for great sadness and for great joy. And it's almost like when the sadness comes, it carves out a space where the joy can find room. One of my sisters had a mental illness. She was bipolar, and she wound up taking her own life. And it was the depths of despair, especially for my mom in those years after that. And my mom was a very unique person. She couldn't repress an emotion if she tried. And it was a little, once in a while I thought, oh Mom, can't you just swallow it? It's just like, wow. She grieved, and she grieved hard for about 10 years. And she also then, in her later years, at like 75, we all have had our children later in life. And she began to have these grandbabies. And it was like something about the depths of that sadness and grief somehow made room in her to celebrate and to enjoy that new life in a way she might not have been able to before. So there's some mystery there about deep, deep sadness somehow making room for deep, deep joy. He talks in the book about gratitude, that when we, maybe it can be hard to be grateful when we are in pain, when we're in sadness. And yet, if we can make room for just a little bit of gratitude, even in the hardest days of our life, it does become a recipe for, instead of spiraling downward, spiraling upward. So that at the end of a day, to sort of take an inventory, like, what can I be grateful for today? Let's say a day of deep sadness. What can I be grateful for? Well, maybe I can be grateful that I got a load of laundry done. Maybe I can be grateful that, I had plenty to eat. And if we can find those moments of gratitude, especially I think at the end of the day, it's sort of like that's a recipe for not spiraling down. And it's and that gratitude he talks about it being the most powerful way of sort of changing our emotional mindset and getting back to a place of well-being. There are a couple of practices related to gratitude that I wanted to mention that we'll be maybe doing more with in just a few minutes. A new thing that's out there is something called a gratitude journal, where at the end of the day you might jot down one or two things that you can be grateful for. And the idea is that you can really sort of notice that and savor it. Let it sort of seep in, because it's sort of like we talked about earlier with our body. If we can allow that feeling that God is here, or that we had this moment of gratitude, if we can really feel that in our body, it's sort of like it becomes more powerful for us, and it becomes a way that we can really be immersed in it. Another gratitude practice would be a gratitude letter. Maybe we write a letter to someone to whom we are especially grateful for a way they've been with us, for a gesture they've done for us. I think as I'm saying this now, what about writing a gratitude letter to God? We could think of the many blessings we have and the ways God has been for us throughout our lives. Do we have a story about gratitude? I think we're just going to do a little exercise with gratitude. So I'm going to invite you again to close your eyes. We're almost done, you guys. You've been just amazing. I want you to close your eyes and focus in on something maybe from today, maybe from the last day or two, for which you are grateful. It could be the smallest thing to something really big in your life. And just see if you can focus your thoughts on that and see if you can feel the gratitude come up in your body. Now I'd like you just to write a sentence or even a couple words about that. We have a notes page that's like the fourth page in your handouts. Just write a couple words or a sentence about that. when you're done with that, we'll go back to our last set of self-inventory questions having to do with emotional well-being. And they are, do you experience pleasurable emotions? Do you embrace painful emotions? Do you appreciate what you have? And do you express gratitude to God and to others? So now he was going to explain this part, but I want to keep us moving. So now we're going to take our whole, all 5 of our areas where we answered questions, that whole SPIRE acronym. And in each area, we're going to add up our total numbers, and then we're going to divide by 4. So I think Kevin has his phone you could use for a calculator if you want to. This is not scientifically created.
You don't need
so
the decimal.
you don't need the decimal. You can round it up, round it down, whatever feels right. So add your totals and divide by 4. Give yourself a rough number or an average in each of those 5 areas. Whatever you want to do. Okay, I'll do it. You'll do the conclusion.
And then the next exercise is you have these concentric circles, and they correlate with the numbers that you have. So each line, S would be
This is on page 3 that he's looking at there.
physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. And these are different quadrants, right, that we're talking about for our resilient well-being. And so let's say your spiritual number is 6. So 6 would be line right there. So this would be number 8
You're counting out from the center.
from center, right? So this would be 8. Let's say your physical well-being is 2. And your intellectual well-being is 4. So you map it out, whatever it is. No value judgment on this. We just the idea behind this is it gives you a mirror. And then after you have those points, then draw the shape. So you have some kind of trapezoid.
Counting from the center out.
Correct, from
Yes.
the center out.
Right.
Whatever your shape might be. And that might be a shape that is surprising to you, or it might be just absolutely confirming for you. The idea, of course, is that the wider the shape, the greater the resilience. So look at that, and we've kind of thrown a lot. There's a little bit of a fire hose. So we've kind of thrown a lot of different ideas at you. There's no way to work on all of them at once, but if you were to work on 2 or 3 different specifics within each category, or 2 and 3 specifics in all the categories combined, it will, like, one physical thing that you might do, one resource or relational thing you might do, one intellectual. What might it be? So take a moment just to write down some brainstorms of 2 or 3, maybe at the most 4 practices that you might have, particularly as it relates to the mapping, a place you might want to grow in your mapping. And if you only can think of one is sufficient. Pretty soon we're going to get into dyads or triads. And it's best if you can figure that out. I'm not going to have you count off by sixes or anything like that. But if you came with somebody, you might consider meeting with a dyad with somebody else. You might consider that. And maybe somebody you know or somebody you don't know as well. And what we'd like you to do is to have you do some active listening, a little bit like this 20-20 exercise. We're not going to do 20 minutes. We're going to do 4. And I can't remember your name. Julie? Judy. So Judy would speak. If Judy and I were in a dyad together, a group of 2, Judy would speak for up to 4 minutes. And the first, and we'll give you a timer. So Judy speaks in about what sort of her thoughts were on the presentation, about what sort of practices she might embrace. And if she's done at the end of 2.5 minutes, then there's silence between us. And then at the end of those that 4 minutes, I respond, and I respond with the question of, how committed are you to these practices? What was the biggest surprise that came to you? Marsha's going to write these down. And what do you need from me for support? So Judy would say her response, and I would say, first question is, how committed are you to your practices? What was the biggest surprise that came out of this exercise? And what do you need from me? And then we reverse. Then for 4 minutes, I would speak. And if I'm not done in 4 minutes, tough luck. Time, guys. And then Julie asked me, how committed are you to these practices? What was the biggest surprise that came out of this exercise? And what do you need from me for support? So we'll get into the dyads as you wish, but there's a chance to kind of expand those connections.
What is the third question?
What do you need from me for support or accountability? Okay? All right, so we'll have you get into those dyads in a moment. We'll start and give this the timer.
Those the questions if there anyone wants to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So go ahead and get in some groups. The second question is, what was the biggest surprise that came out of this exercise?
The questions are here.
Okay? So this is the integration portion of our exercise. Okay? This is the kind of thing that at churches we can do the weather sure is nice. The sports, the Mariners sure are doing well. It's going deeper than that. This is kind of going more who we are with one another.
And we don't start with the questions, we start with our own reflection.
Yes, exactly. And when the first person is speaking for 4 minutes, the person who's listening does not speak at all.
So the questions come after the sharing.
Yeah. The sharing.
It's kind of a follow-up.
Exactly. So, okay. So we're going to give you another minute, and then we'll get Jensen to do that.
So a minute and then they start.
Well, there's still some people still writing.
Okay.
Okay. So remember, the first time that somebody's going to share for 4 minutes, and then the active listener is going to respond with these 3 questions. About ready? About ready? So the sharing starts now. Find some, Martin, Karen, it looks like somebody's right behind you. Unless you guys want to. Is that okay? You guys can be together. you're done sharing, just let it be silent. One more minute for sharing. 1 more minute for sharing, for the first person sharing. All right, now we'd like the person who was the active listener is to ask these, first ask this question, and then wait for an answer, then ask this question, answer it, and then ask this question. So, all right, we're going to wind up another 30 seconds. So now we're going to switch, and so the first person who was listening is now going to be the sharing person. The person who's going to be sharing is going to speak on these.
Their reflections.
You speak on your reflections, and you're going to speak about looking at your map, about what your reflections are. What you wrote down is what your plan might be. But you have 4 minutes, okay? So we're going to go up to 4 minutes, and here you go. And if you're the listener, you don't speak at all. Are you ready? And we begin. question is, what do you need from me for support? What a beautiful thing that is when a congregation, when people lean into with one another. And what if somebody would say, I need you to come to coffee with me in 1 month to talk about this stuff again. Check in with me. Good. Have somebody check in with you. Have somebody that's truly invested in your life. That would be a beautiful thing. Questions, comments, observations. This is a chance for you to, yeah.
I just really realized how much support network we've created inside of our congregation.
Beautiful.
Like we can actually touch bases and update each other on this on a regular basis because we're meeting together on a regular basis outside of services.
Absolutely.
And we have this network built in that Pastor Karen has fostered for us. It's
Absolutely.
really powerful.
Absolutely. And that builds resilience in individuals and in the group together. Absolutely. Wonderful. Yeah.
When we're being the professional listener, do we keep our face blank?
No.
Because I find myself wanting to, open my eyes and smile, and, but that's showing agreement.
Yeah.
And that's probably not what I'm supposed to do.
I would say it is. I would say, I don't necessarily agree that active listening means don't talk at all. I think in my line of work, it's sometimes giving that head nod or like, just almost like encouraging the person to continue, letting them know you're hearing what they say. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's good.
Other observations? Yeah.
Well, especially when we got into depression,
Yeah.
there was no hope.
Yeah. Sadness without hope.
Yes,
Yeah.
but depression is really with no reason. And I haven't come to that conclusion because I have a wonderful life. But there's still depression.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to understand.
Yeah. This a nuance is very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. It's sometimes just a purely chemical thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up.
We are made as mind, body, and spirit. And part of who we are as mind, body, and spirit is we are psychologically comprised together. It does not bother me at all to talk about psychology and sociology and theology in the same breath. In fact, as we live together in a church community, there's just as much what goes on about psychology as what there is about theology in terms of how we get along with one another, how we interact with one another. It's just as much as sociology as what there is about theology. It's equal parts. Any other comments, questions? Start moving to yeah.
This really brought me to the present moment.
Oh, beautiful. And because when we start focusing too much in the future, it invites, we're open to anxiety. When we start being too much open about the past, it can invites us into depression. But if we are open in the present, that's the gift. Yeah.
What was the guy with that photograph?
Yeah, I'll have to find that
Was it listening?
about empathy. I'll get it back to you in a second.
Economist.
I know where you live. Well, to move into conclusion here, part of resilience is the audacity to move forward without any known outcomes of what we're working, what's coming. To move forward, even though there's not any evidence that what is coming back to us is that these steps are moving toward. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. If you want, take out your phones and pull up the in your Google in your search engine. Pull up the name Julia, Julia, Sands, Sand, Julia Sand. and look for the you can put Wikipedia. That's the page I'm going to go to. But before we get to Julia, Sam, we talked originally about resilience, which is to bounce back, right? Resilience. There's also a word that's coming up in our church life together, resurrection on Easter. It's about a month away. That's also another Latin word, and what it means is it's the prefix re and the suffix surrect. And what it means is to stand up again.
Did you say Julia or Julianne?
Julia.
Is your last name Brian?
No, Sand, S-A-N-D.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. But resurrection means to stand up again. So Christ in the tomb, God rose Jesus from the dead. And Jesus moved from that stone shelf and put his feet on the stone floor. And Jesus, a human being with muscles and tendons, had to stand up again. It's God's doing, and also Jesus in the tomb standing up again. It's God the one who's firing those corpuscles, making the blood, and getting the heart to start again after 3 days. But Jesus stood up again. There's a connection between resilience and resurrection. So Julia, we'll get don't read too much into the letter yet. I don't want you to get to the surprise yet, but I want you to follow along. So about 20 years after Abraham Lincoln, there was a very good man who was elected president, James Garfield. Garfield was a Union soldier, and he was a phenomenal leader. He rose to the ranks of leadership. He was elected president in 1880. Within 6 months of the time that he first became president, he was on the 4th of July. It was 3 months at the time he became president. He was on the 3rd of July. He was getting on a train to see his family who was going up into New England. His family was already up in New England. There was a man who wanted to, who thought that new President Garfield owed him a job in the federal government, and walked up to James Garfield with a pistol and shot him. Garfield did not die right away. It took him over 3 months for him to die. He was in the White House. There was some arrogance with the doctors that would, they developed the first metal detectors in order to help find the bullet. But the doctors who were convinced where the bullet wasn't going to let him show the other side of his chest, where the bullet really was. They didn't understand biology like we understand it. They never washed their hands when they dug their fingers into the hole to try to get the bullet out. President Garfield died not because of the bullet wound, but because of the infection from the doctors digging into the hole. The person who was the vice president was a guy named Chester Alan Arthur from New York City. He was never elected into a position of leadership. He was always appointed. He was, most recently, he was the commissioner for New York for the ports. He was in the pocket of a senator named Roscoe Conkling, who thought that if Garfield died, then my man becomes president, and he will be the puppet, and I will be the real president. So what happened is that Garfield is sick. Garfield is getting sicker. And Julia Sand, who lives in New Jersey, writes a letter. This is where, if you have it, pull up Julia Sand. You can pull it up in Wikipedia. You can see with the first letter. I'll read it along, and you can follow along. This is what she writes. It's just beautiful. She's 31 years old. The hours of Garfield's life are numbered. Chokes me up. Before this meets your eye, you may be president. And the people are bowed in grief. But do you realize it? Not so much because he is dying, as because you are his successor. She's putting it out there. What president ever entered office under circumstances so sad? The day Garfield was shot, the thought rose in 1,000 minds that you might be the instigator of the foul act. Is that not a humiliation that cuts deeper than any bullet can pierce? The kindest opponents say, author will do right, adding gloomily, he won't succeed though, making a man president cannot change him. Chokes me up. But making a man president can change him. Great emergencies awaken generous traits which have lain dormant a life, half a life. If there is a true spark of true nobility in you, now is the occasion to let it shine. Isn't this amazing? Faith in your better nature forces me to write to you, but not to beg you to resign. Sorry, but this is our American history. This is so beautiful. Do what is more difficult and brave. Reform. It's not proof of highest goodness never to have done wrong, but it is proof of it, sometimes in one's career, to pause and to ponder and recognize the evil and resolutely turn against it. Once in a while, there comes a crisis which renders miracles feasible. A great tidal wave of sorrow has already rolled over the country and has swept you loose from your old moorings and set you on the mountaintop alone. Disappoint our fears. Isn't that brilliant? Yeah. For the nation, force the nation to have faith in you. Show from the first that you have none but the purest of aims. You cannot slink back into obscurity, if you would. 100 years hence, schoolboys will recite your name in the list of presidents and tell of your administration. And what shall prosperity say? It is for you to choose. Julia Sand. She was 31 years old when she wrote that. She had no idea if he received it. She were to write 32 more letters. She became an advisor to the president without ever knowing that she was an advisor to the president. And the only reason we know this is because Arthur's grandson, years later, found a stack of letters from Julia Sand in his paperwork. We also know that not only did he keep them, in the last couple months of his administration, he went by special carriage to New Jersey, unannounced, to knock on the door of Julia Sand. She was not ready for the president to come by. She hid behind a door inside the parlor. She had no idea up until then that he even read the letter. But it's her resilience to press forward without knowing what the result of this would be. So, with this, building resilience happens through discipline and practices, and it ties with our Christian faith. It's cultivating our capacity to rebound and bolstering our psychological immune systems. It's this discipline of repeated action, not knowing what the outcomes are going to be, but writing those letters anyway, like Julia did. I found that story in the book Destiny of the Republic by Candace and Millard. It's a biography of James Garfield. Well, to conclude, the conclusion. Hard times are going to come. These practices cultivate your capacity to rebound. They bolster your psychological immune system. And they invite us to stay in touch with each other, with conversations of significance. This is our time together. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I want to say thank you. I've never bowed to my brother before.